Well, it is Monday night and it is 9:30, so we're going to try to wrap this up here. The three chapters to get to tonight, and hopefully we'll be able to get to those. I got my little one still up, and she's kind of wandering around the house right now, so I may have to get up in the middle of this from time to time to see to her. But we'll try to make it through all three of these and be done with Genesis tonight. So super exciting. Give me just a second, if you will, and I want to make sure she is where she's supposed to be. As she just wandered downstairs. Karis, please come up here. I need you to stay up here, please. Anyway, the joys of having little ones, right? So we're going to be in Genesis 48. I'm not going to hold off too long getting started here because we got a lot to get through, and so I want to get to it. So hey, Mom, we're at Genesis 48, and we're going to be using the King James as we have been. I've got the ESV open for some. Do what?
Did your mom join?
Yes, she did. So hey, Stephen. So Kara says hi, Nana. But we're going to be reading the ESV or we'll have the ESV up for some modern English kind of things. Let me get in here and say hi for a second. All right, cool. And I actually noticed tonight as I was going through this, prepping for tonight, that there are some differences between the ESV and Stephen. So I'll point a couple of those out as we come to them, and there's actually a few names from the original. Well, thanks, I appreciate you saying that. A few names that we'll be looking at, a few words from the original language that we'll be looking at. Plus, we're going to kind of zoom forward a little bit to Joshua chapter 17. So, hey Tracy, welcome aboard. All right, so we're going to see the end of Israel tonight, as well as kind of the end of the positive or the good times that Israel and his descendants had while in Egypt. So Nana says she loves you too, Karis. And then we'll pick up with Exodus perhaps tomorrow. Hey Logan, welcome aboard. We are studying the last three chapters of Genesis in our series here. So let's get to it. Genesis chapter 48 and verse 1. And it came to pass after these things that one told Joseph, Behold, thy father is sick. And he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And one told Jacob and said, Behold, thy son Joseph cometh unto thee. And Israel strengthened himself and sat up on the bed. So remember, Jacob is a really old man now, and he's lying in bed, barely able to move, but he kind of summons his strength a little bit, and he sits up in bed so he can receive Joseph and Joseph's two sons. And Jacob said unto Joseph, God Almighty, that's the El Shaddai, appeared unto me at Luz, in the land of Canaan, and blessed me, and said unto me, Behold, I will make thee fruitful, and multiply thee, and I will make of thee a multitude of people, and will give this land to thy seed after thee for an everlasting possession. And so we remember the time that Jacob was heading north and fleeing Esau, and he gets this blessing, and then this is now kind of being brought back up. This is not necessarily Jacob passing this on to Joseph in the same way. We're not going to see that again, because at this point what's going to happen is that Jacob's going to kind of pass this blessing on in a different way. Hey Rosalind, he's going to pass it on to his 12 sons, giving Joseph a double portion, but by talking to them specifically about the land, about returning to the land of Canaan. So by faith Jacob and his wife blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshipped, leaning on the tops of his staff. Yeah, exactly so. Hebrews 11 is a really good kind of shortcut or synopsis of the book of Genesis. All right. So verse 4, And said unto me, Behold, I will make thee fruitful, and multiply thee, and I will make of thee a multitude of people, and will give this land to your seed after thee for an everlasting possession. And we've talked about this before. This idea of everlasting possession is everlasting or forever, or any of those terms, is it's for the duration of the covenant, is what that means. It's not for all time, obviously, because if that were the case, hey Jonathan, then God lied, because Israel hasn't had possession of that for hundreds of years up until the 20th century, when that land was returned to them. So if God had said this land is going to be yours forever and ever in terms of possession, then God broke his promise, and he's not worthy of worship. But if we understand God to mean that this land is going to be yours for the duration of the covenant, then that did actually happen. It lasted all the way up until the cross, and even a little bit thereafter, a few years afterwards, when we see that the Jewish state fails, and the events that transpired at the end of the first century, and then I think a little bit later on in the second century, that kind of finishes them off, drives them out, and they lose the land at that point. So anyway, it's just a distinction, a difference in what happens here compared to what happened to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So verse 5, and now thy two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt. Oh, thank you.
It's pretty good, you.
Yeah, it's a very good you. So everybody gets to see this is a pretty good me. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. So, anyway, now thy two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt, before I came unto thee into Egypt, are mine. As Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine. And what he's saying in this verse, as Jacob is saying, is that like Reuben and Simeon are his natural children, Jacob is claiming these two, not in a biological sense, but in an inheritance sense. He's giving them a blessing. He's essentially giving them a double portion. Joseph is his favorite son. Joseph is who saved them during the famine, and basically allowed God or allow God's promise to be fulfilled in preserving Israel and all of his family. And so God, working through Joseph, did that. And so here you have Jacob is giving Joseph a double portion, in the same way that he's giving Reuben and Simeon a blessing, or a birthright, a land and a promise and stuff. He's saying, Joseph, I'm giving these to your son, so he gets a double portion of that. And we see that as we move through the books of history, that actually plays out. And thy issue which thou begettest after them shall be thine, and shall be called after the name of their brethren in their inheritance. So they're not going to be the tribe of Joseph. That's one of the things.
So this is the K-A-R-Y-S.
That's very good. Can I finish my life? No, thank you. And so it's not called the tribe of Joseph. Hey, Bobby. It's actually the two tribes, the half tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. And we're going to see here there's a little bit of a change up from what Joseph thought was going to happen, and kind of the same way that Jacob and Esau happened. We're going to see that this is a kind of a reoccurring theme now. We see it with kind of Cain and Abel, or if you want to look at it a different way, Cain and Seth, where the younger brother is sometimes given the blessing or to carry on, where the tradition was to give it to the older. Sometimes God has a different plan for whatever reasons. And so, and of course, obviously that is based on God's omniscience and what he sees that needs to be happening, so that his promises can be fulfilled through these people that he's chosen to separate out to bring Messiah into the world. So, and as for me, which came from Padan, Rachel died by me in the land of Canaan in the way, when yet there was but a little way to come unto Ephrath, and I buried there in the way of Ephrath, the same as Bethlehem. And Israel beheld Joseph's son, and says, Who are these? And Joseph said unto his father, They are my sons, whom God hath given me in this place. And he said, that is Jacob, bring them, I pray thee, unto me, and I will bless them. Now the eyes of Israel were dim for age, so that he could not see. And he brought them near unto him, and he kissed them, and embraced them. And Israel said unto Joseph, I had not thought to see thy face, and lo, God hath showed me also thy seed. So Jacob says, I didn't even think I was going to see you again. Here I am not only seeing you, but I'm seeing your children. Yeah, no, Stephen, it's very interesting how it works out. The 12 tribes by land are actually the 11 sons of, the 11 sons of Jacob, but including Joseph getting a double portion. So one of those 11 gets divided twice to make the 12th, and Levi doesn't get a portion at all. Levi has no inheritance in the land because that's where the priesthood comes from. And so, yeah, you're exactly right. It's an interesting, strange way. It gets even more complicated when you start talking about the dividing of the kingdom. The 10 tribes of the north, it includes Ephraim and Manasseh, and the 2 tribes of the south are Judah and Benjamin. Where's Levi? What happens to Levi in that? Well, actually, Levi continues in the southern tribe. Levi is still there. It's still the priesthood, and they don't go with the northern tribes. And so that's a great point to bring out. Is it does get a little bit different, a little bit confusing. It's because the priesthood is separated out, and it's typifying the idea of the New Testament priesthood that doesn't have an inheritance in the physical world. There's no inheritance here for us. We're not, as Christians, we're not looking for. They lived there. They had homes. It's not like they didn't have homes or whatever, but they didn't have an inherited land, and they didn't follow the same inheritance rules that were there. But in kind of a foreshadowing the priesthood of all Christians, we don't have an inheritance here in the physical world. We're not looking for that. So, yeah, that's where the tithes came from. That's the providing of the tribe of Levi. And not all Levitical descendants were priests either, but they were all supporters of the priesthood. And so every bit of the tribe of Levi went into supporting that whole priest caste of people. And so you were either a priest, obviously the females couldn't be priests, but you were a priest or you were somehow a supporter of the priest. And we see that kind of play out a number of ways throughout the books of history. So, oh yeah, there's totally a lot of types with this. So, all right, anyway, Karis, not now. Okay, thank you. So verse 12, and Joseph brought them out from between his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near unto him. So the way that Joseph has it set up, he's got them arranged in the way that Joseph thinks is going to happen. He brings his oldest son, which is Manasseh, in his left hand, to bring it to Jacob's right hand, because he thinks Manasseh is going to get the bigger blessing. And so Ephraim is going to be in Joseph's right hand so that he comes up to Jacob's left, so that when Jacob reaches out, his right hand, which the right hand is kind of the sign of authority or the sign of blessing. You know, we see all through the Bible that, things divided right and left. The right always gets the kind of the good spot, if you will. And so Joseph has this intention, and it doesn't work out that way. And so Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it upon Ephraim's head. So he crosses over, who was the younger, and his left hand upon Manasseh's head, guiding his hands wittingly. In other words, he knew what he was doing. For Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk, the God which fed me all my life long unto this day, the angel which redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads. So here is another instance where the word angel is associated with and used interchangeably with the idea of God. Jacob is talking about the theophany. he is talking about God interacting with him as the messenger that provided for him and brought him these messengers. Remember when Jacob wrestled with God. Remember when Jacob talked with talked with God. There was reference to the angel of the Lord. Jacob comes out clearly and says, the angel which redeemed me. Well, no celestial angel, just a mere angel like Gabriel, has the power to redeem. There's only one Redeemer. Who is the Redeemer? God. And so when we talk about this angel redeeming him from all evil, this angel is God. And so, again, and I'm going to point it out every time because it's important to do so as we go along, I believe that the Archangel Michael is Jesus, God the Son. And I think that is borne out in Scripture very strongly, very potently, not just once or twice. It's not just a thing you have to kind of infer and kind of dig for, and it's one of those kind of unobtrusive things where you don't see it. I think it jumps right out at you. I think it's just obvious, but we don't really think about it. And because of the stigma of the Jehovah's Witness, which I am not, because they believe it, and so many people are against them and have so many negative things or negative ideas about those people, then they attach that belief to that particular denomination's doctrine as opposed to something drawn out of the Bible. And the Jehovah's Witness believe that Jesus is not God, and that's a problem. But there's no reason why we can't refer to Jesus as the ultimate messenger or the archangel, and believe that he is called Michael, which means one who is like God, prior to his incarnation through Mary. And so here is another one of those blatant, obvious places where the angel of the Lord is called God and used interchangeably. So, but anyway, Jacob is crossing his hands. He puts one hand, his left hand over this way and his right hand over that way, and he blesses them. And he gives the greater blessing to Ephraim, the younger. And this is definitely prophetic in nature. You're going to see here that what he does here and what he does in the next chapter before he passes away carries the weight of prophecy. And it definitely has the authority of that prophecy. But you also kind of have to think that this has, he can't be missing the point that this is what happened to him, that he as the younger receives the birthright and the blessing. And so, that's definitely got to be in his mind. Stephen says, Isaiah 59, verse 20, the Redeemer will come to Zion, and to those who turn from transgression in Jacob, says the Lord. Jesus is God, who can redeem but God. Absolutely. And so an angel that can redeem from evil here has to be the angel, the archangel, which is God the Son. So I agree 100% with that, Stephen. So anyway, verse 17, and when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it displeased him, and he held up his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head into Manasseh's head. And Joseph said unto his father, not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand upon his head. In other words, he thought because his eyesight was bad that he got confused somehow and tries to correct him. But in verse 19, his father refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations or people. And so Jacob knows what he's doing. Remember, he's guided here by inspiration. No man prophesies unless he is prophesying. No man prophesies true unless he's prophesying by the power of God, the Holy Spirit guiding him. And so he knows where to put his hands. He knows what he needs to be doing. And he gets it right. Thank you. So he blessed them that day, saying, in thee shall Israel bless, saying, God make thee as Ephraim and as Manasseh. And he set Ephraim before Manasseh. And Israel said unto Joseph, behold, I die, but God shall be with you and bring you again into the land of your fathers. So remember, God told Jacob that, hey, Taylor, welcome aboard. We are just about to finish up Genesis 49, but we're going to do, 48, but we're going to do 49 and 50 tonight too. So stick around if you'd like. God told Jacob, don't be afraid to go into Egypt because I will lead you there and I will bring you back out. And we're going to see that happen here. But now Jacob is telling the same thing to Joseph. I'm going to die and I'm going to be with you. But God's going to be with you, and he's going to bring you personally, Joseph, into the land of your fathers. And so I think it was Stephen a couple of nights ago when we were doing this, we were talking about this, that Joseph, when he passes away, he's going to be entombed. And it isn't until they leave quite a bit later that Joseph's bones are taken out of the land of Egypt and is buried in the land of Canaan, in the promised land. So the last thing here is verse 22. Moreover, I have given to thee one portion above thy brethren. So he gets two portions. He gets one for each of his sons, which is what completes the 12 tribes. So right now it kind of looks like there's 13 tribes because Joseph gets a double portion. But again, we see that Levi doesn't actually get a land portion later on. So that's how that gets fixed. That's why it's still called the 12 tribes. Which, and by the way, of interest to this is when you read about these guys, read about this nation historically, that's how it's always presented historically. The 12 tribes historically, the physical nation of Israel is always, always, always presented as the 12 tribes, including Manasseh and Ephraim, but not including Levi. The 10 tribes of the north include Manasseh and Ephraim. The 2 tribes of the south are Jacob and Benjamin, and Levi is not included. But when you get to Revelation, and it names off, it's naming the 144,000, the 12,000 from each of the tribes, Joseph is mentioned and Levi is mentioned. And that is an important thing to understand because of the shift in the understanding. And I'm not going to get into that anymore tonight, but it's an important difference to see when you get into the book of Revelation that John does not use the historical listing of the tribes. He uses a different listing. So anyway, verse 22, moreover, I have given to thee one portion above thy brethren, which I took out of the hand of the Amorite with my sword and with my bow. And the interesting thing here is that's not what Jacob personally did. What Jacob did is he bought some land. What he's doing is he's looking forward to what happened. He's looking forward prophetically at what's going to happen when Manasseh and Ephraim, the tribes, get there. And we find that in Joshua 17. Not now, please. I'm in the middle of this. Go play. We find in the book of Joshua in chapter 17 that they do get this mountain that is in the land of the Amorites, and they have to take it by force. They have to take it with the bow and with the sword, and it's kind of a big deal. It gets its own chapter and everything. So that's what Jacob is doing here. So now in chapter 49, you're going to see that Jacob is going to talk to all the sons, and he's going to continue with his prophetic vision, and he tells them what's going to happen when they reach the promised land and moving forward, and he's really going to kind of get all the way to the coming of Messiah. And so that's the nature of this next chapter. So chapter 49, verse 1, and Jacob called unto his sons and said, gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. So this is the last days. That phrase has a very potent meaning. Moses refers to it quite a bit, and you see it quite a bit throughout, especially the Old Testament, this idea of the last days. It never, ever, ever once, not even once, refers to the end of time. The end of the universe, the end of creation. Not once does it ever refer to that. The last days is always a phrase that speaks of the Israelite nation and their point in history specifically that goes all the way to the end of the Jewish state. So when you see it here, what's going to befall you in the latter days or in the days to come is what the ESV says. But Jacob is basically saying, all right, this is going to be you guys moving forward. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen after you come out of Egypt. And it's going to go all the way up. And we're going to talk a little bit about what happens to you all the way. And it says up until the peace comes or Shiloh comes. So keep that in mind. Remember, Moses is the foundation for all of these symbols that we read throughout the rest of the Old Testament. They don't come out of nowhere. Moses is the foundation for them. So this is what Jacob says. Verse 2, gather yourselves together and hear, ye sons of Jacob, and hearken unto Israel your father. Reuben, thou art my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity, and the excellency of power. Okay, so he's like, Reuben, you're my firstborn, you're my oldest kid. You were the beginning of my, because children are seen as power, authority, strength of a man was seen in his children. That's why they had big families. That's why Abraham was so sad that he wasn't going to have any children. And yet he ended up having 7. And so Reuben was the first sign that Jacob was going to be blessed. And so he's kind of starting off on a high note here. But he goes on to say, unstable as water, you will not excel, because you went up to thy father's bed and defiled it. You went up to my couch. So he's like, I was going to bless you, but you did a really bad thing. You went up to sleep with my handmaid. And so you're not going to excel because of that. So then he goes on, Simeon and Levi, our brethren, instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. O my soul, come not thou into their secret, into their assembly, mine honor, be not thou united. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they digged down a wall. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob, and scatter them in Israel. And so what he says here is, this goes back to what happened with Dinah, their sister, and the young man Shechem. And when they went in and they said, you got to be circumcised if you're going to marry our sister, all the men got circumcised in that city, and Simeon and Levi go in and kill all of the men. And they had to flee the land because of that. And so Jacob is remembering that, and he sees that these 2 young men, at the time, they're not young now, were violent men. And he says, you're not going I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. And that's kind of what happened specifically to Levi, is they didn't even get an inheritance. So he does not give them the blessing that they were necessarily looking for. But verse 8, Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. Thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies. Thy father's children shall bow down before thee. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he couched as a lion, and as an old lion, who shall rouse him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. Binding his foal unto the vine, and his ass's colt unto the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes shall be red with wine, and his teeth white with milk. And so here, Judah is given a great blessing, the greatest blessing out of all of them, even greater in some respects than what Joseph. Joseph got a double portion of the land promise, but here, Judah is the son that is given the authority. The idea of the scepter shall not depart from Judah. That's where the kings were going to come out of. So if you look at the history of the people in Samuel, they were wanting to have a king. We got to have a king. We want to be like the nations around. God had already prophesied that there would be kings in the nation of Israel. That was a foregone conclusion. It was something that was stated multiple times. There are laws about it that we'll read in some of the later books of the law. And so it wasn't that God wasn't wanting them to have a king, but they were asking for a king before God was wanting to give them a king. And so what did they do? They looked to Saul. And Saul was everything that they thought they wanted in a king, but he was from the tribe of Benjamin. And what ended up happening is that Saul was not a great king in the eyes of God. And he constantly was getting things wrong. And eventually his whole entire family gets wiped out. And then David, who is of Judah, becomes king. And it's from David's descendants there, and all the way through it says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come. And so that's where we get all of the kings of Judah up through the Babylonian captivity, the last king of Judah, and then you have the captivity for 70 years, and they come out of captivity. And you still have the kings of Judah and the priesthood and all of that up until the Herods. And then the Herods are puppets of Caesar. And so that's the time when Shiloh come. That word Shiloh, when you look it up, it actually means tranquility. The root of that means peace. But it is definitely a version of the word for Messiah. Stephen says, I will make you exceedingly fruitful and will make nations of you, and kings shall come from you. Yeah, it's another exactly right. There's another place where God prophesies that there would be kings. So anyway, that's a very powerful verse talking about what's going to happen. But here we have all the way, the latest of all of these prophecies here talking about the sons. This is the last or the latest prophecy that's given. And well, what's happening? It's the last days, and we're going to read about that. Hey Arthur, welcome aboard. We read about the last days constantly, over and over and over again, and it all pertains to that first century AD, where Jesus Christ came and he set up his church, he set up his kingdom, and the end of the Jewish state came about. You look at the books that follow the captivity, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. You look at the prophets that followed after that. Yeah, Jeconiah's curse. There definitely wasn't anybody from the line of Jeconiah because of that curse. So when you look at the line of kings from the standpoint of post-Babylonian captivity, you're really dealing more with a theocracy at that point. The Sanhedrin Council is formed. The high priest is there. There is a ruler, and they are of the tribe of Judah, but they are not from Jeconiah. So, yeah, he probably does. So, anyway, it's just kind of, here we see in the book of Genesis itself is the foundation for this idea of the last days, and it points towards the time of Christ. And that is throughout. If you understand the last days or the time of the end, or all of those phrases that are used throughout the rest of the Old Testament properly, they point to the time of Christ. They point to the coming of the Messiah, the foundation of the church. So, yeah, definitely. Exactly so, Stephen. All right. So anyway, and it talks about some of the other blessings that Judah would have. He's going to have his garments washed in wine, his clothes in the blood of grapes. That's talking about the wealth there. His eyes shall be red with wine, means he's gonna be rolling in grapes. He's gonna have this bounty for himself, and his teeth were gonna be white with milk. And so there's gonna be this richness, and part of that is in the fact that Judah he would become the ruling tribe over the rest of the tribes of Israel, and later just the kingdom of Judah, which they eventually get the name Jews from. So, right, exactly, Stephen. So, and I think Zechariah is a good place to read about that. When you start talking about there's a priest there and a leader there, and they're kind of typifying in a way Jesus. Both of those men are, but we'll get there when we get there. Verse 13, Zebulun shall dwell at the haven of the sea, and he shall be for a haven of ships. His border shall be unto Zidon. So just he's saying, Zebulun, your place is over by the sea. Issachar is a strong ass couching between two burdens, and he saw that rest was good, and the land that it was pleasant, and bowed his shoulder to bear, and became a servant unto tribute. And so the tribe of Issachar was going to be more of the servant type, probably craftsmen, laborers, not too much into the military side of things. The servant aspect here is what we see most from the tribe of Issachar. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. He'll be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path that bites the horse's heel, so that his rider shall fall backward. You see in this a bit of wisdom, the idea that Dan would be judge, and the wisdom being compared to as wise as serpents. And so Dan is considered a wise young man. I mean, if you can put it in our modern terms, maybe a bit of a nerd or a scholar type. But he was going to be one that they would go to for judgments and for whatever court-related stuff that they had during the time. But he's a small tribe. Govern, judging. Just he has wisdom is the point here. Anyway, and then you have verse 18, I have waited for thy salvation, O Jehovah. So this is interesting because to me this looks like an interjection here. Like remember, Jacob's kind of on his deathbed here. He's saying this right before he passes away. And so I don't know that this is connected to Dan so much as this is just something that Jacob just is saying, just a kind of an interjection here in between. I have waited, or I wait for your salvation, O Jehovah. Where is this salvation going to come from? Where do we see that Jacob is finally fully and completely saved? Well, he's already mentioned Shiloh through Judah. And so, is this just kind of a deathbed thing where he's just kind of throwing this out there? I don't see that it's connected to Dan, though. Verse 19, Gad, a troop shall overcome him, but he shall overcome at last. So he gets a one-liner here. At the first, it looks like Gad's going to be overcome, but he'll triumph in the end. Out of Asher, his bread shall be fat, and he shall yield royal dainties. So you can imagine Asher is going to be kind of a land of bakers and luxury items, not so much in terms of the military. They all fought, but you see here that these blessings are kind of the prominent features of each of the tribes. Naphtali is a hind in the King James. It's a doe, female deer, let loose, and has it says here goodly words. In the ESV it says bears beautiful fawns. So to me the ESV looks closer to the original language, and makes more sense contextually. The idea that Naphtali was going to be like a doe let loose to reproduce, and has beautiful offspring, beautiful children. So there's going to be this fruitfulness, and they're going to have a bountiful gain or increase in people. Then he comes back to Joseph with all the brothers present. Joseph is a fruitful bow, even a fruitful bow by a well, whose branches run over the wall. So they're going to talk about, Jacob is talking about Joseph being very fruitful. Of course, he's already given him the double portion here. The archers have sorely grieved him and shot at him and hated him. And I think that's a reference back to what had happened to him in the past. Joseph has suffered all this tribulation and trials, and he's talking about the brothers. But these people have come up against him, but his bow abode in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. And from thence is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. Um, it's a fruitful bow. Yeah, I don't see where that's in here. But anyway, I think what Jacob is talking about here is that, yeah, there were some bad things that happened to you. People were trying to do some bad things to you, your brothers essentially. But God has used you to prosper, and you have kind of been a protector of us. He's the shepherd. And here in Joseph, you kind of have that type antitype where Joseph is kind of called the shepherd that protects his people while they're in bondage. Or well, not necessarily in bondage, but while they're in Egypt, which becomes the land of bondage. And Jesus is kind of the same thing when he's called the Great Shepherd, and he kind of protects his people while they're in the spiritual or metaphorical Egypt, which is the under the Jewish state, under the Jewish rule. So, and you can read about that in Isaiah 19. Verse 25, even by the God of thy father who shall help thee, and by the Almighty who shall bless thee with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lieth under, blessings of the breast and of the womb. The blessings of thy father have prevailed above the blessings of my progenitors unto the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph and on the crown of the head of him that was separate from his brethren. Okay, so here you have Jacob blessing Joseph as much as he can, to the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. This idea that Joseph was going to have kind of a great blessing here, and we're later going to see that the northern tribes of Israel are often referred to as Ephraim. And it's the strength of Ephraim, it's the prominence that Ephraim has in the northern tribes, where Judah has the prominence in the south, Ephraim has the prominence in the north. And so you're going to have this dominion or power of one of Joseph's tribes, the tribe of the younger son, that is going to be powerful. And this says that they shall be on the head of Joseph and on the crown of the head of him that was separate from his brethren. The crown of the head, that's not a crown like you put on your head, but the crown, the tops of the head is what the blessing is. So it's going to fill them up. The blessings here are going to fill up the half tribes of Joseph. Benjamin shall raven as a wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. And so he's going to give to Benjamin a wealth of prey, if you will. He's going to have a wealth of food available to him, enough that he can, at the beginning of his tribe's sojourn in the land, in the promised land, have enough to eat then, and then enough to divide the spoils in the latter time. And what's interesting here is that Benjamin, along with Judah, is one of the two tribes, not counting Levi, one of the two tribes that survives into the last days. The other tribes don't, but Benjamin is said, and at night, that's the end. Talking about the end of the time of the nation of Israel, that there'll still be enough there for him to divide up his spoil, or to provide for his tribe. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is it that their father spake unto them and blessed them, and every one according to his blessing he blessed them. And he charged them and said unto them, I am to be gathered unto my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field of Ephron the Hittite for a possession of a burying place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah and his wife. And there I buried Leah. Now remember, Rachel is buried in Bethlehem. So Rachel is not going to be in that tomb. But Leah is already dead and buried there in Machpelah. And Jacob will be left, and will be, when he passes away, they're going to carry him back and bury him there as well. So it's interesting. Rachel, the one that he loved, isn't buried in the family tomb, but Leah, who was kind of despised or looked down on, was not the one he wanted, ends up being buried in the family tomb. So a little bit of interesting trivia there, in that God watched out for Leah, took care of Leah. The purchase of the field and of the cave that is therein was from the children of Heth. And when Jacob had made an end of commanding his sons, he gathered up his feet into the bed, and yielded up the ghost, and was gathered unto his people. And so Jacob passes away, and that brings us to the last chapter, Genesis chapter 50. So verse 1, Joseph fell upon his father's face and wept upon him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father, and the physicians embalmed Israel. And 40 days were fulfilled for him, for so are fulfilled the days of those which are embalmed. And the Egyptians mourned for him 70 days, or 70 days. So he's embalmed, and then there are 40 days where they kind of wait for that process to kind of settle, and then they mourned for him 70 days. And when the days of his mourning were past, Joseph spake unto the house of Pharaoh, saying, If now I have found grace in your eyes, speak, I pray you, in the ears of Pharaoh, saying, Hey, you don't need to be lifting that around. That's going to weaken it, and then it won't work anymore. Okay? That's not that kind of a toy. Okay? Verse 5, My father made me swear, saying, Lo, I die, in my grave which I have digged for me in the land of Canaan, there shalt thou bury me. Now therefore let me go, I pray thee, and bury my father, and I will come again. And Pharaoh said, Go up, and bury thy father, according as he made thee swear. And Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his house, and all the elders of the land of Egypt. So when they go to bury Jacob back in Machpelah, where everybody else is buried, it's not just Joseph and his brothers that go. It's all of these leaders from Egypt, like a host of guys are going. They're servants of Pharaoh and elders and representatives, and just it's kind of this big national thing that is happening because Joseph has so much respect. And Pharaoh is like, okay, this is the father of Joseph. We're going to give this guy a lot of respect. And so they go with this big entourage into the land of Canaan to Machpelah to bury Jacob. And all the house of Joseph and his brethren and his father's house, only their little ones and their flocks and their herds they left in the land of Goshen. Okay, so Joseph is going with his kinsmen, and those of his father's house. He's just not taking the little ones. Right. Yeah, they were definitely masters of that process, as we have definitely seen through archaeology. Verse 9, And there went up with him both chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great company. And they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond Jordan, and there they mourned with a great and very sore lamentation. And he made a mourning for his father 7 days. So they come to this threshing floor of Atad, and they mourn there for 7 days. And so the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning in the floor of Atad. They said, This is a grievous mourning to the Egyptians. So the Egyptians have just kind of somehow come out of Egypt, and they're here, and they're mourning now for 7 days, and the Canaanites see it. And so the name of that place they called Abel Mizraim. Well, Abel just means meadow, and Mizraim is the name for the Egyptians. If you look at the word Egypt or Egyptians, it comes from that Mizraim. And so the Mizraim or Mitzrayim, or you could take it all the way back, the land of the Copts. It means the double straits or whatever. I know that Stephen's been dealing with some guys that have really kind of taken that to the nth degree and tried to make something out of that it's not. But it just means here that it's the meadow of the Egyptians, the mourning of the Egyptians. Yeah, so Abel, the word Abel just means if you look at the word Abel, which, we have the man named Abel, it just means meadow, to grow green, to withstand. Yeah. So a plain, but anyway, so they see that, and so they call it the the meadow of the Egyptians, or the plain of the Egyptians, which is beyond Jordan. Verse 12, and his sons did unto him according as he commanded them, for his sons carried him into the land of Canaan, and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah, which Abraham bought with a field for a possession of a burying place of Ephron the Hittite before Mamre. Whew, man, Moses really wants them to know where they're buried, and they do. But that is a very thorough description, and we've heard it multiple times. Joseph returned into Egypt, verse 14, and his brethren, and all that went up with him to bury his father, after he had buried his father. When Joseph's brethren saw that their father was dead, they said, Joseph will peradventure hate us, and will certainly requite us all the evil which we did unto him. So now the brothers are worried. Okay, Jacob's not here to tell Joseph, be nice to your brothers. They did bad stuff to you, but be nice to them. And so they thought, with Joseph and all his power, that now that Jacob was gone, Joseph's like, well, I don't have to worry about my dad dying if I do something to my brothers. So now's the time for vengeance. They're worried about that, and that is how they think. That's not how Joseph thinks at all. That's just not the kind of person that Joseph is. It's definitely like Jacob had a parade, exactly so. So they sent a messenger. Verse 16, they sent a messenger unto Joseph, saying, Thy father did command before he died, saying, So shall you say unto Joseph, Forgive, I pray thee now, the trespass of thy brethren and their sin, for they did unto thee evil. And now we pray thee, forgive the trespass of the servants of the God of thy father. And Joseph wept when they spake unto him. So they send this messenger. I don't know if Jacob actually said this or not, but they send this messenger that said, Hey, Dad said that when he's gone, forgive us. Don't hold it against us what we did to you. And Joseph's already done that. Joseph has already been kind to them. He has provided Goshen for them, brought them out of the land of Canaan during the famine. He's taken care of them. He's identified himself. I think Joseph has already shown that he forgives them. But now that Jacob's gone, this worry comes back up for them. Remember, this is 17 years later. And so when Joseph hears the message, it just makes him sad that they still think that way about them. And verse 18, his brethren also went and fell down before his face, and they said, Behold, we be thy servants. So they're going to him, and they're like, we're not worthy. Please don't hurt us. And Joseph said unto them, Fear not, for am I in the place of God? In other words, am I your judge? Am I the one that's supposed to judge you for these things? But as for you, you thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass as it is this day, to save much people alive. So he says, I'm not going to be your judge. I'm not going to judge you for the things that you did. You intended evil to happen to me. They were jealous of him. They hated him. Most of them wanted to kill him. And thanks to Judah, they didn't. They ended up selling him into Egypt. But he said, you intended evil, but God used it for good. So I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to hold it against you. There's no vengeance that's going to come from me. God used it to save a whole bunch of people and to bring you here and to bless you. So he's comforting them again. He says in verse 21, Now therefore fear ye not, I will nourish you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spake kindly unto them. So Joseph it's still Joseph. He's still the positive, kind, loving brother that he has always been. And he's, look, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to take care of your kids. Your families are going to be fine. You're not going to see any vengeance from me. And this example that we have of Joseph and his ability to see the good, to see the opportunities that God gave him and take advantage of them, and then to be able to forgive his brethren, even though they had done such horrible things to him. I can't imagine my brothers. I got 3 brothers, and I don't imagine them doing something like that to me. I certainly wouldn't do it to any of them. Well, court maybe. No, I'm kidding. But that he just was able to forgive like this. And I think we see here a great example for us to, number one, bad things are going to happen. We know bad things happen to us. That is just the way life is. Bad things happen. Are we using that for an opportunity for good? Are we looking for God's hand providentially? I don't think he does this in a supernatural way, but he still works providentially. Are we looking for God's hand in guiding us to opportunities? Are we looking for those opportunities? Are we taking advantage of them to do good amidst all of the evil? And on top of that, when people seek forgiveness from us for wrongs they've committed to us, do we forgive them? Can we have the heart that says, I'm going to nurture you and your children? And it's just a fantastic example here that Joseph said. I love his heart, the way that Joseph treats his brethren after what they did to him. So anyway, verse 22, and Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's house, and Joseph lived 110 years. And Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation. And so he sees Ephraim's children, and Ephraim's children's children. So he sees great-grandchildren. The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were brought up upon Joseph's knees. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I die. And I want to kind of talk briefly about that in 23. We see Ephraim and his children and his children's children to the third generation. So we see a lot of, already Ephraim is starting to grow, and we see a lot of offspring. But Joseph only sees Machir, the son of Manasseh, the children of Machir. So he sees the grandchildren, and then the Manasseh is not talked about as much. We only see children of Machir, which is one son of Manasseh, where Ephraim's children, plural, and then it just expands out. So we're already seeing here the expansion of Ephraim being the greater of the two, even though he's the younger son. Manasseh, being the older, just doesn't have as many offspring. He's not going to have as big of a tribe as what Ephraim and Jacob saw that. So verse 24, and Joseph said unto his kinsmen, I die, and God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land unto the land which he sware to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. So it says brethren in the King James, but remember, brethren is just kinsmen. We don't know at this point how many of Joseph's actual literal brothers are alive. We don't even know if Benjamin's still alive at this point, because we just aren't told. But Joseph, being 110, talks to his kinsmen, to his sons, his grandsons, the other people of the other tribes. He's talking to them just in a kind of a general sense, but there's nothing to indicate here which one of his brothers is actually still alive. And Joseph took an oath of the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. So Joseph says, yeah, I'm going to die. Robert, you just caught us at the end here. You'll have to go back and watch from the beginning. But Joseph says, I'm going to die now. Would you swear to me that you will take my bones up out of Egypt when you leave, and bury me in the land of promise? And he says, God will surely visit you. Okay. So he's gonna come and get you out of here. And when he does, when God moves you back to the land of promise, take my bones with you when you go. And so Joseph dies at 110. And so they embalm him and they put him in a coffin, and he's going to sit in that coffin until the book of Exodus here in a few generations. Now understand, where this feels like, when we jump from Genesis to Exodus, it feels like a really large jump, but we're actually going to be crossing over these timelines, because Joseph is seeing his children, his children's children, and his children of the fourth generation. So Joseph is likely seeing people in his lifetime that left Egypt, that fourth generation that he gets to bounce on his knee as a great grandfather or whatever, those people are probably an older portion of those who left Egypt, because it says the fourth generation. I think that was Genesis 17. Oops, if I could spell right. Fourth generation. No, 15. In Genesis 15:16, right when Abraham is getting the promise from God. But in the fourth generation shall they come here again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. So there's a lot of things that pull together in these texts that indicate that it wasn't 400 something years that they're in the land of Egypt. It's actually closer to about 215 or so. And 17 of those years are actually pretty good years where Jacob is still alive, and then Joseph still being alive for decades after that. So not the whole time they're not slaves. Their slavery was a relatively brief, probably century or so at most. But again, this Joseph sees that unto the third generation. He sees his great-grandchildren, and those great-grandchildren have to be, we'll see when we get into Exodus, it has to be people that were coming out of Egypt and wandering in the wilderness. So anyway, thank you very much for being with me through this walkthrough of Genesis. I've gotten a lot out of this. I have grown through my study, as I usually almost always do. Anytime I read through the Bible, whether it be a survey or whether it be thematically or whether it be my favorite way, which is verse by verse like we've done here, then I'm able to grow. I get something out of it every time. And thank you for joining us, or thank you for joining me, and I hope you have gotten something out of it too. I look forward to moving into Exodus either tomorrow or the next day. I'm probably not going to do Wednesday night, the topic they're doing on Wednesday night with my friends. Not one that really interests me all that much, so I might do something Wednesday night. We'll have to see. But anyway, thanks again, and we'll see you guys another time.